My sister looked me up and down in front of 200 wedding guests, then smiled. "You're too poor to be family," she said quietly. "So sit in the back, stay silent, and don't embarrass us." Nobody defended me. Not my parents, not my relatives, not even the groom. I simply smiled, apologized, and walked outside. I made one phone call that lasted less than 30 seconds. When I came back, the ceremony started like nothing had happened. Then, right before the first wedding toast, the music stopped. Every phone in the ballroom buzzed. My sister's smile disappeared. And suddenly, everyone wanted to hear my side. The first person to tell me I didn't belong at my own sister's wedding was my sister. She didn't whisper it because she was embarrassed. She whispered it because she wanted me to hear every word. "You're too poor to be family anymore," she said, adjusting the lace on her designer wedding gown without even looking at me. "So, do everyone a favor. Sit quietly in the back, don't mingle with my guests, and please don't embarrass us." For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Then she smiled. Not the smile a sister gives before saying she's joking. The smile of someone who believed every word she had just spoken. I glanced around the bridal suite. 3 bridesmaids looked at the floor. My mother pretended to organize flowers. My father kept checking his watch as if nothing had happened. No one said, "Emily, that's enough." No one said, "You can't talk to your brother like that." Silence can be louder than screaming. I simply nodded. "Of course," I said. She looked relieved, almost disappointed that I hadn't argued. "I knew you'd understand." No. She knew I'd spent my entire life keeping the peace. That had always been my role in our family. Emily was the successful one. I was the dependable one. She chased status. I chased stability. Growing up, she wanted designer clothes, expensive vacations, and the biggest house on the street. I wanted a small business, honest work, and enough money to sleep peacefully at night. Neither dream was wrong. But somewhere along the way, my family decided only one of them deserved respect. When Emily started dating Daniel, a successful commercial real estate developer, everything changed. Suddenly our parents spoke about her like she'd won an Olympic medal. Every dinner became another celebration of her success. Every family gathering became another opportunity to compare our lives. Emily just bought another investment property. Daniel surprised her with a European vacation. They're joining the country club next month. Then the questions would come. "So, how's your little repair business doing?" I'd smile. "It's doing well." Which was true. My home repair company wasn't glamorous. I wasn't driving a luxury SUV or wearing tailored suits. But my bills were paid. My employees were treated fairly. My customers trusted me. I slept every night knowing I hadn't lied to anyone to get ahead. Apparently, that wasn't impressive enough. 3 months before the wedding, Emily mailed invitations that looked more like luxury magazines than wedding cards. Gold foil lettering. Custom wax seal. Handmade paper. At the bottom was a dress code. Black tie preferred. I almost didn't go. Not because I couldn't afford a suit. Because I knew exactly how the day would unfold. Still, she was my sister. You keep hoping family will surprise you. I even spent nearly 2 months setting aside money for their wedding gift. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to contribute toward their honeymoon. It wasn't a huge amount, but it represented dozens of long workdays, skipped dinners out, and weekends spent taking emergency repair calls instead of relaxing. To me, that made it valuable. I carried the envelope in my jacket pocket as I walked into the ballroom that afternoon. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Fresh white roses covered every table. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Everything looked flawless, except the way my family looked at me. One aunt glanced at my suit and frowned. A cousin I hadn't seen in years smiled politely before turning back toward guests wearing designer labels I couldn't pronounce. Even the seating chart had a message. My parents. My sister. Our grandparents. Every close relative sat near the front. My name was printed alone. Table 27. The very last table beside the service doors. Close enough to hear dishes being washed. Far enough that I wouldn't appear in most photographs. I laughed quietly to myself. Someone had actually planned this. I had just sat down when Emily walked over with her wedding coordinator. She looked at my table, then at me. "Oh, good," she said. "You found your seat." I did. I figured this was appropriate. She paused before saying the last word, almost enjoying it. "The front tables are reserved for people who've really supported us." The sentence landed harder than I expected, because she knew exactly how many weekends I'd spent helping renovate the first house she and Daniel bought. She knew who repaired their plumbing at midnight, who fixed broken doors without charging them, who loaned them money years ago when no bank would. Apparently, none of that counted anymore. Money had replaced memory. I reached into my pocket and felt the envelope containing their wedding gift. For the first time all day, I wondered whether they deserved it at all. Then I looked toward the ballroom entrance. A quiet idea formed in my mind. Instead of arguing, instead of begging for respect, I stood up, smiled to myself, walked outside, took out my phone, and made one call. It lasted less than 30 seconds. When I hung up, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked calmly into the ballroom. For the first time that day, I wasn't nervous anymore, because I already knew something no one else in that room did. I returned to my seat before anyone noticed I'd been gone. The ballroom looked exactly as it had 5 minutes earlier. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Guests laughed over champagne. The string quartet continued playing as though the world couldn't possibly be falling apart. Emily caught my eye from across the room. She smiled. Not because she was happy to see me, because she believed she'd won. The ceremony began right on time. Daniel stood at the altar looking genuinely nervous. I had always liked him. Unlike the rest of my family, he'd never openly looked down on me. But there was one thing about Daniel. He trusted people too easily. Especially Emily. The vows were beautiful. The guests wiped away tears. My mother cried so hard she ruined her makeup. My father looked prouder than I'd ever seen him. For a few moments, I almost forgot everything that had happened. Almost. Then the reception began. The ballroom transformed into a celebration. Music filled the room. Servers carried expensive meals from table to table. Photographers rushed from one smiling guest to another. Everywhere I looked, people were talking about how perfect the wedding was. Emily planned every detail. It looks like something from a magazine. They're the perfect couple. Funny how appearances work. The prettier the picture, the easier it becomes to hide what's outside the frame. Halfway through dinner, I noticed the wedding planner answer her phone. Her smile disappeared. She stepped away from the head table. A minute later, she returned, whispering something to Emily. Emily frowned for only a second before forcing another smile. Whatever it was, she didn't want anyone noticing. Dinner continued. Then Daniel's best man received a phone call. He excused himself from the table. When he came back, he looked confused. Not frightened, just confused. He leaned over and whispered something into Daniel's ear. Daniel glanced toward Emily. She shook her head almost immediately. "No." I saw her mouth. "It can wait." Daniel nodded, but his smile wasn't quite as convincing anymore. I quietly continued eating. I hadn't touched my phone since making that call. I didn't need to. Everything else was already in motion. The DJ invited everyone to gather near the dance floor for speeches. Parents first, then the maid of honor, then the groom. Everything proceeded according to schedule. My father stood proudly, with a champagne glass. To my beautiful daughter. The room applauded. My mother spoke next. She called Emily the greatest blessing our family has ever received. I smiled to myself. Some blessings are expensive. Then Daniel took the microphone. He looked directly at Emily. "I've waited my whole life for today." She reached for his hand. For just a second, everything seemed genuine. Then someone tapped the DJ on the shoulder. The music stopped. The microphone produced a sharp burst of static. Every conversation froze. A member of the hotel staff walked quickly toward the wedding planner. They whispered. The planner's face drained of color. Emily noticed immediately. She walked over, still smiling for the guests. "What is it?" she whispered. I couldn't hear the answer, but I saw Emily's expression change. Confusion, then disbelief, then panic. She looked across the ballroom toward Daniel. He was already staring at his phone. One by one, more phones began vibrating. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sound spread across the room like falling dominoes. Guests checked their screens. Several looked at each other. A man near the front quietly stood up. He wasn't family. He was one of Daniel's business partners, a highly respected commercial lender who had helped finance several of Daniel's largest projects. He looked toward Emily. I think we need to talk. The room became silent. Emily forced a laugh. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm afraid it can't. Daniel looked between them. What's going on? The businessman held up his phone. I've just received verified financial documents that should have been disclosed weeks ago. Emily's face went completely pale. Those documents are private. They're also accurate. People stopped eating. Forks rested against plates. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. Another guest approached. Then another. Not relatives. Professionals. People who had business relationships with Emily. Each of them had received the same information. None of them looked angry. They looked disappointed. Daniel slowly lowered his glass. What documents? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, the businessman spoke. Outstanding debts. He looked at Emily. Unpaid vendor balances. Another guest added quietly. And financial statements that don't match what we've previously been shown. The ballroom filled with whispers. Emily looked around desperately. No, this is completely out of context. One vendor walked directly toward the wedding planner. I'm sorry, he said politely, but we've just confirmed today's payment never cleared. Another vendor checked his phone. So did ours. The planner blinked. What? Within seconds, 3 more vendors were quietly comparing invoices. None of them raised their voices. None of them caused a scene. They were simply verifying facts. Daniel turned toward Emily. You told me everything had been paid. It has. They're saying it hasn't. It's a banking delay. All of them. She didn't answer. For the first time all evening, Daniel looked at me. Not with suspicion. Not with anger. With confusion. As though he suddenly realized there was a part of this story nobody had told him. He slowly walked across the ballroom, stopped beside my table, and asked almost under his breath, Can you tell me what's really happening? I looked at my sister. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking down on me. She was looking at me with fear. And I realized something. The phone call hadn't ruined her wedding. It had simply made the truth arrive before the honeymoon did. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone. He simply looked at me and said, Would you come with me? The ballroom had become strangely quiet. Guests were pretending to continue eating, but no one was paying attention to the food anymore. Everyone was watching us. Emily stepped in front of Daniel before we reached the hallway. There's nothing to discuss. Daniel looked at her. I'll decide that. It was the first time all day I'd seen her lose control. You're seriously going to believe him? She snapped. Daniel didn't answer. He simply motioned for me to follow him. We walked into a small conference room beside the ballroom. His best man closed the door behind us. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel sat down across from me. I need the truth. Not your opinion. Not family drama. The truth. I nodded. That's all I have. I opened the envelope I'd been carrying since I arrived. Inside wasn't just their wedding gift. Behind the card was a folder. Copies. Receipts. Bank records. Loan agreements. Emails. Everything had dates. Everything could be verified. Daniel slowly turned each page. His expression changed with every document. I explained quietly. 5 years ago, Emily asked me for help. They wanted to buy their first investment property. The bank required additional funds before approving the loan. They promised it would only be temporary. Daniel looked up. I never knew this. I know. They asked me not to tell you because they wanted it to look like they had done everything themselves. I slid another document across the table. My savings. Almost everything I had. I wasn't investing in a business. I was helping family. Daniel stared at the paperwork. But Emily always said her down payment came from her own investments. It didn't. He kept reading. The next pages showed unpaid invoices. luxury purchases, credit balances, wedding deposits that had been postponed instead of completed. Nothing illegal, nothing fabricated, just facts. Facts that painted a very different picture from the one everyone had been shown. I never contacted your guests, I finally said. I only called one person. Daniel frowned. Who? The accountant who had been trying to reach Emily for weeks. He already had every document. He only needed permission to release information to the people directly affected. Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair. So, all you did was stop the truth from being delayed. I nodded. Exactly. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that appears when reality finally catches up with assumptions. The conference room door opened. Emily walked in without knocking. Her makeup was beginning to smear. You've always been jealous of me, she said. I looked at her. No. You've always hated seeing me succeed. I never hated your success. I hated becoming invisible every time you succeeded. She laughed bitterly. Oh, please. You've been waiting years to embarrass me. I shook my head. No. You embarrassed yourself the moment you decided money mattered more than people. She turned toward Daniel. Tell him to leave. Instead, Daniel asked a question. One simple question. Did he help pay for our first property? Emily hesitated. Just for a second. Then she whispered. Yes. And did you tell everyone it was your money? She closed her eyes. Yes. And are the vendors telling the truth? Another pause. Yes. No excuses. No dramatic speeches. Just 3 honest answers. The room felt heavier than before. Daniel stood up. I need some time. He walked out alone. Emily started after him. He didn't stop. Back in the ballroom, the celebration slowly unraveled. The DJ packed away equipment. Guests quietly gathered their coats. Several vendors met privately with the wedding planner. Nobody shouted. Nobody celebrated. The mood simply disappeared. One conversation at a time. I placed the wedding card on the gift table. The money was gone. Instead, inside the envelope was a handwritten note. I truly hoped today would be the beginning of your happiest chapter. But happiness built on pretending never lasts. I hope one day you value honesty more than appearances. I signed only my name. Then I walked outside. The evening air felt lighter than the ballroom. 3 weeks later, I heard the wedding had never officially turned into the honeymoon everyone expected. Daniel postponed several major financial decisions until everything had been reviewed. Emily spent months repairing relationships she had damaged herself. Some could be repaired. Others couldn't. My parents called me repeatedly. For the first time in years, they wanted to explain. They said they had been trying to keep peace in the family. I finally answered one call. I spent years believing keeping the peace meant staying quiet while being disrespected. It doesn't. Peace without respect isn't peace. It's surrender. That conversation ended differently than all the others. No shouting. No insults. Just silence. A few months later, I moved into a modest new home. My repair business continued growing. Not because of revenge. Because customers trusted someone who kept his word. Sometimes people ask whether I regret making that phone call. I always give the same answer. No. Because the call didn't destroy a wedding. Lies did. The call simply arrived before another year of pretending could begin. And that day, I learned something I should have understood long before I walked into that ballroom. Real family never asks you to become smaller, so someone else can feel bigger. The people who truly love you don't measure your worth by your bank account. They measure it by your character. And once I stopped chasing their approval, I finally found something worth far more than money. I found my peace.